The sound was frantic, a wild, desperate scratching at my front door that cut through the roar of the blizzard outside. It wasn't the kind of timid tap you'd expect from a lost cat, or the heavy pounding of a person seeking shelter. No, this was sharper. Claws dragging, scrabbling, raking across the wood with such force that I swore the doorframe shook. I stood frozen in my living room, every muscle in my body locked tight, my breath misting in the dim glow of the emergency lamp. I should have been too numb with fear to think, but my mind was sharp, painfully sharp, as if the storm outside had stripped away every barrier between instinct and terror. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound came in bursts, then stopped abruptly, only to start again a moment later, more insistent each time. I knew, God help me, I knew, that whatever waited on the other side of that door wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this storm. Not in this world. People always say curiosity kills the cat, and maybe that's true, but in that moment I wasn't curious. I was terrified. Terrified because, deep down, I already understood one simple truth. If I had opened that door, I wouldn't be here telling you this. The storm howled like something alive, rattling the windows as the scratching continued. Then, without warning, it stopped. Silence. A silence so complete that even the blizzard seemed to hold its breath. My ears rang with the absence of sound. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over, that maybe I'd imagined it, just a trick of wind and nerves. And then came the knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps against the wood, perfectly spaced, perfectly measured. Not frantic, not wild. Human. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I just stood there, staring at the door as the snow piled higher against it from the other side, listening as my pulse hammered in my ears. That night changed everything. It's the reason I wake up sweating, the reason I'll never look at a snowstorm the same way again. But to understand why the scratching terrifies me, to understand what truly came to my door that night, I need to start at the beginning. Vermont winters have a rhythm to them, one I'd grown up with and thought I understood. By late November the mountains turn white, and by January the storms roll in like clockwork. People complain about the cold, the icy roads, the endless shoveling, but deep down we take comfort in it. Winter is a part of us, and once you've lived through a few, you stop treating them like disasters and start treating them like seasons. Predictable, familiar, safe even. My house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, tucked into a slope of evergreens that creaked when the wind pressed through them. It wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled perpetually of coffee, and a living room with a fireplace that had outlasted 2 generations of owners. I used to joke that the fireplace was the real heart of the home, and in winter it was true. Nothing felt safer than curling up there with a blanket while snow piled against the windows. Neighbors weren't far, though we only really saw each other when we were digging cars out after a storm or swapping snow shovels. There was a kind of unspoken pact among Vermonters: help each other when the storms hit, and otherwise let folks be. My nearest neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, had a cheerful border collie that she walked up and down our road nearly every afternoon. I'd wave sometimes or stop for small talk, but mostly we kept to ourselves. Inside my own home, the rhythm of blizzard prep was almost comforting. You learn to do it without thinking. Fill the wood rack, check the flashlights, pile the blankets by the couch, heat a pot of stew that can be reheated on the stove if the power goes. By the time the snow starts, everything feels tucked in and ready. That night was no different, at least at first. I remember the glow of the fireplace washing the walls in soft gold as I settled into the couch, steam rising from a mug of tea I cradled in both hands. The storm warning had been loud on the radio, but warnings always were. I'd laughed to myself about the dramatics, turned the dial until I found some music, and let the sound fill the space. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the siding in a way that was almost musical. Felt normal, safe. That's why I ignored the first little prickle of unease. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to pause every so often, like it was catching its breath before blowing harder. Maybe it was the way the trees groaned like voices pressing through the dark. Whatever it was, I dismissed it. Storm nerves. Cabin fever setting in too early. I told myself I'd been through worse blizzards, and I had. The kind that buried cars up to their roofs, the kind that knocked out power for days. You live through a couple of those and you stop worrying about the rest. But something about this one was different. Couldn't explain it, not then. The storm moved in too fast, like it had been waiting for nightfall to swallow the valley whole. The snow thickened against the windows until the world outside blurred into nothing. And for the first time in years, I felt the creeping thought that maybe I wasn't as prepared as I thought. Still, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just another Vermont winter, another blizzard to ride out by the fire. I even chuckled at my own nerves, though the sound was hollow in the empty room. That night, small things started to feel wrong. Storms have a certain rhythm to them, at least the ordinary ones do. The wind rises, it screams through the eaves. Then it settles for a moment before coming back again. There's a pattern, a give and take you learn to live with. But that night, the storm didn't feel like it had a rhythm at all. It felt alive. By early evening, the snow was falling so thick I couldn't see past the front porch. It wasn't just flakes drifting lazily down. It was a curtain, heavy and endless, swallowing the world whole. The pines at the edge of my yard blurred into shapeless shadows, then disappeared completely, as though the forest itself had been erased. I kept my radio tuned to the weather updates, but sometime around 7 the signal began to crackle. Static swallowed the voice of the announcer, drowning him out until only fragments bled through. Words like dangerous and stay indoors lost in the hiss. By 8, it was nothing but white noise. I checked my phone, more out of habit than need, and found the signal flickering, vanishing, then returning only long enough to tease me with a half-loaded page. The last notification I received before it went dead was from a neighbor's group chat. Anyone else's lights flickering? I typed a reply, but it never sent. At first, I thought the silence would comfort me. Usually, in a storm, the constant howl outside becomes a kind of lullaby, white noise that masks everything else. But this silence, it was wrong. The snow didn't just muffle the sounds. It devoured them. When the wind died down, it was as though the entire world held its breath. No creak of the trees. No rustle of animals in the underbrush. Nothing. Just the hiss of snow piling higher and higher against my windows. I realized with a chill that I hadn't seen a single bird, squirrel, or even the stray neighborhood cats since that afternoon. The woods around my house weren't just quiet. They were empty. I tried to shake off the feeling by tending the fire, stirring the embers, adding another log. The flames flared, casting shadows that seemed to twitch against the walls, as if the firelight was trying to imitate movement where none existed. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone in my home, as though the storm had cut me off from everything that tethered me to the rest of the world. And then the lights began to flicker. Just once at first, a brief dip that left me staring at the lamp as though it had blinked. Then again, a longer pause. The firelight leapt, stretching the shadows, and I found myself holding my breath. I told myself it was normal. Power lines buckle under ice, branches snap onto wires. It happens all the time. But deep down, I felt it. This wasn't just the storm. It wasn't the blizzard itself we should have feared. The unease grew, creeping through the house like a draft I couldn't block out. My tea had gone cold on the table, untouched. I pulled a blanket tighter around my shoulders, though I didn't feel cold exactly. It was something else, a heaviness, like the storm wasn't just pressing against the walls, it was pressing against me. At one point, I thought I heard something outside, just barely. A sound buried beneath the storm. I went still, listening, straining against the silence. Came again, a faint scrape. Not wood shifting, not branches bending, but something sharper. Something deliberate. I stood by the window, but all I saw was white. Just snow. Just the void of winter swallowing my yard. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and uncertain, and I hated how small I looked in that moment. The fire cracked behind me, startling me enough to spin around. My heart was racing. I told myself I was imagining things, the way you do when the world outside disappears and all you have left are shadows and noise inside your own head. But then, from the front of the house, I heard it again. Not a scrape this time, but a soft, rhythmic sound. A scratching, faint, testing, almost like fingertips or claws, trailing lightly across the wood of the door. That was the first intrusion, and it was only the beginning. At first, I told myself it had to be an animal. Out here, raccoons and strays sometimes paw at doors, hoping for scraps. It was the only explanation my mind could grab onto, the only thing that didn't make my stomach twist. But the sound wasn't right. It came in uneven bursts. Scrape, pause, scrape, then a dull thud, as though something heavier leaned against the wood. I froze on the couch, listening so hard my ears hurt, every hair on my body standing on end. The storm outside had dulled to a low roar, and the silence between gusts made the noise at my door all the clearer. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It wasn't frantic, not yet, just testing, like it was seeing if the door would give way. I swallowed hard, set my mug down with hands that trembled, and forced myself to stand. Each step toward the front hall felt heavier than the last, as though I were walking underwater. My boots by the mat seemed too far away, my coat hanging by the door too thin. When I reached the knob, I didn't touch it. I just pressed my ear against the wood. The sound came again, sharp, deliberate. I held my breath, listening. A faint whine followed, thin and almost pitiful. That gave me pause. For a split second, I pictured some poor dog caught in the storm, nose pressed against my door, begging to be let in. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe that, needed to, because the alternative, the thought of what else might be making that sound, was too much. Still, something stopped me from unlocking the deadbolt. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the way the scratching never wavered, always in the same spot, always the same rhythm. Animals shift, they circle, they paw and move. This stayed. Waiting. I whispered into the silence. "Hello!" The scratching stopped instantly. My pulse thudded in my ears. The blizzard moaned around the house, filling the silence, but nothing else came. No shuffle of paws, no whimper of an animal. Just nothing. Then came the knocks. 3 of them, sharp, even, spaced perfectly apart. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't anything that should have been out there in the snow. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Who would be out there in this storm? Why hadn't I heard footsteps crunching through the drifts? Why hadn't I seen a shadow move across the window? I waited, every muscle in me coiled, staring at the door as if I could burn a hole through it. The silence stretched on until I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. Then the scratching started again. This time more frantic, as though my hesitation had agitated whatever waited outside. Claws raked against the wood, high and shrill, making my teeth ache. The door shook in its frame, though I knew it was locked tight. I wanted to scream at it to stop, to go away, but the words stuck in my throat. My body wouldn't move, wouldn't speak. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound ceased. The storm pressed in again, filling the space with howling wind and rattling branches. I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours, too afraid to turn away, too afraid to look. That's when I realized it wasn't an animal. And worse, deep down, I knew it wasn't the only thing trying to get in. But fear has a funny way of twisting logic. I tried to rationalize it, clinging to the idea that maybe it was just some unlucky traveler lost in the snow, or maybe my imagination running wild with storm jitters. I told myself I'd laugh about it in the morning, when the sun came up and everything was normal again. And then I heard it, the voice outside. At first, I thought it was the wind shaping itself into something human. Storms can do that, make you hear what isn't there. But when I pressed my ear closer to the door, I realized it wasn't the storm. It was a voice. "Hello?" It called. Soft, measured, too calm for someone caught in a blizzard. Every instinct in me screamed to stay silent. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, I need shelter." My breath caught. Against my better judgment, I whispered back, "Who's there?" No answer at first, just silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Then, a knock. 3 perfect raps. And the voice again. "Please, don't you have room for one more?" The The phrasing unsettled me more than anything. Not help me or I'm freezing. Just that eerie practiced line, as though it had rehearsed the words. Behind me, Rachel stirred on the couch. She'd been dozing under a pile of blankets, trying to ride out the storm the way we always did. Half asleep, half listening for the power to go out. She blinked at me groggily. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I held a finger to my lips. "Listen." The voice came again, drifting through the wood. "It's so cold out here. Please let me in." Rachel's eyes widened. She threw off the blanket and hurried to the door. "Someone's out there?" I caught her wrist before she touched the knob. "Don't," I hissed. "It's freezing out there," she snapped. "If someone's lost, it's not right." My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. "Listen to the way they're talking. Too calm, too off." She glared at me, tugging her wrist free. "You'd leave someone to die?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't sure what I'd do. My gut screamed danger, but logic kept whispering that maybe it was just some poor hiker or driver who'd gotten stranded. People froze to death in storms like this all the time. As we argued in hushed tones, the voice circled the house. That was the first time I heard the footsteps, crunching deliberately in the snow, moving from the front door to the side windows. Rachel and I froze, eyes darting to the glass panes. Scratch, scratch. A sound came from the siding, claws dragging just beneath the window frame. We moved into the kitchen, hearts pounding, only to hear it again. This time at the back door. Thud, scratch. A gentle tap against the glass, followed by that same voice, calm as ever. "You don't have to be afraid. I just need warmth. Let me in." Rachel's face had drained of color. "Why is it going around the house?" she whispered. I shook my head. "People don't move like that. Not in this weather." The voice drifted through the walls, always the same tone. No breathlessness, no urgency, just that measured, unnatural cadence. At one point, it sounded like 2 sets of knocks, front and back door in quick succession, 2 perfectly timed for one person to make it. Rachel clapped her hands over her ears, shaking her head. "This isn't possible. This isn't." I pulled her toward the fireplace, keeping my voice low. "We just need to wait it out. Don't answer. Don't look. Just wait." The footsteps circled again, crunching deliberately, slowly, as though whoever or whatever it was wanted us to know they weren't leaving. For nearly an hour, the sounds moved from door to door, window to window, scratching and tapping, calling softly for us to open. Each time, the phrasing was slightly different but never natural. "Don't you have room for one more? It's warm in there, isn't it? You wouldn't leave me out here. Not you." Rachel gripped my arm until her nails dug into my skin. She was trembling, whispering half prayers under her breath. I couldn't bring myself to stop her, because I needed the sound of her voice to drown out the thing outside. Eventually, the noise quieted. The scratching stopped. The footsteps faded into the storm. We sat there, rigid and breathless, waiting for the next knock that didn't come. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice cracking. "Do you think it's gone?" I shook my head. "No, it's waiting." And I was right, because not long after, we realized we weren't the only ones hearing it. Started small, quiet enough that, at first, I thought I was imagining it. Faint squeak, a quick scuttle of claws across the hardwood. My mind immediately leapt to mice, but when I flicked my flashlight beam across the dining room floor, I saw something else. A trail of muddy paw prints led from the doggy door. Rachel stiffened beside me. "Tony?" she whispered. Tony was the neighbor's orange tabby who sometimes slipped in when the weather turned bad. He had a reputation for showing up uninvited, curling himself on our couch like he paid rent. But when the cat finally emerged from the shadowed hallway, I knew right away something was wrong. His fur was puffed, tail rigid, ears flat against his head. He didn't meow. He didn't saunter toward us with his usual arrogance. Instead, he darted under the china cabinet and wedged himself into the tightest corner, eyes wide, body trembling. "Tony," Rachel whispered again, crouching low. But the cat didn't move, didn't even blink. Before I could answer her, the doggy door flapped again. Harder this time, the sound of frantic claws against plastic. Then, with a desperate yelp, a border collie barreled into the dining room, nearly skidding across the floor in its hurry to stop. "That's Mrs. Johnson's dog," I breathed. "Tucker." I'd seen him 100 times being walked up and down the street, tail wagging, friendly as they come. Now, his posture was entirely different. Head low, tail tucked so tightly between his legs it almost disappeared. He slunk to the far corner, away from the cat, curling into himself, his whole frame trembling like a leaf. His whining rose in volume, high-pitched, mournful. Rachel reached out a cautious hand, but the collie snapped, teeth flashing just enough to warn her away before retreating further. Not aggressive, not wild, just terrified. My skin crawled. I'd seen dogs afraid of thunder before, of fireworks, even of strangers. But this was something else. This was survival panic. The house went still for a moment, just the storm raging beyond the walls, the sound of our own shaky breathing. And then the doggy door opened again. This time it wasn't just one visitor. A pair of mice scurried inside, darting across the kitchen tiles like tiny shadows. But instead of seeking crumbs or warmth near the stove, they went straight to the nearest corner and froze, bodies pressed tight against the wall. Their sides heaved with sharp, rapid breaths. Rachel let out a nervous laugh, brittle and sharp. "What the hell is going on? It's like we're hosting some animal shelter." Her words hadn't even finished echoing before the bathroom window rattled. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the sound, heart hammering in my chest. Something small and frantic was clawing at the screen. At first I thought squirrel, maybe raccoon. But when I shone the beam, the light caught glossy eyes and a long, sinuous body. "A marten," Rachel said behind me, voice tight. She'd grown up here. She knew the wildlife better than I did. "But they don't act like this." It tore through the mesh, squeezing inside before either of us could react. The moment it hit the bathroom floor, it bolted, straight into the hall, straight into the same corner where the collie cowered. And just like the others, it didn't lash out, didn't hiss or scratch. It just curled into itself, trembling, trying to disappear. Within minutes, more followed. Mice, another dog, one I didn't recognize. A red cardinal fluttered in, wings ragged, feathers dusted with ice. It perched on the curtain rod, shoulders hunched, making a low, keening sound that didn't sound like birdsong at all. One by one, they filled the house, not rushing for food, not fighting each other, just hiding, clustering. The strangest part? No conflict, no predator chasing prey. The cat didn't so much as glance at the mice huddled inches away. The dogs ignored the bird above them. It was as if some ancient truce had been struck between them all. Rachel clutched my sleeve, her voice trembling. Why aren't they tearing each other apart?" I swallowed hard. "Because they're too scared to care." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every breath of those creatures was shallow, staccato. The collie whined softly, head pressed against the wall. The cardinal gave another mournful chirp. Tony's eyes glinted from beneath the cabinet, unblinking, locked on the window like he was waiting for something. I couldn't stop my mind from spinning. Animals don't reason like we do. They don't invent monsters in their heads. They don't scare themselves with stories. They only fear what's real. And if they were breaking every instinct to flood inside, to cower together without conflict, what were they running from? That thought echoed in my skull until it hurt. I moved toward the living room window, half dreading what I might see. Outside, the blizzard still raged, snow whipping so thick it looked like static. But beneath the shrieking wind, I felt something else. A rhythm, a heaviness in the ground, faint but unmistakable. Thud, pause, thud. Something massive was moving out there. I turned to Rachel, my mouth dry as ash. "Something's coming." At first, I thought the heavy thuds were my imagination, a phantom rhythm stitched into the storm's howling. But when I pressed my palm to the glass, I could feel it. A tremor running through the frame, subtle but steady. Something big was out there. Rachel moved beside me, clutching the flashlight so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. The animals had gone still, every single one of them. The dogs no longer whined. The cardinal ceased its mournful chirps. Even Tony had frozen mid-breath beneath the cabinet. It was as though they knew what was coming before we did. Through the swirling wall of snow, a shadow materialized. Massive, lurching. My first irrational thought was that some neighbor had dragged a snowplow up to our porch. But then the shape resolved, stepping close enough for the weak porch light to catch. And my stomach lurched. A bear. A huge black bear. But it was wrong. So horribly wrong. Its lower jaw hung loose, ripped away as though torn clean from the bone. One hind leg dragged uselessly behind, the flesh shredded in ribbons. Across its body were gouges so deep I swore I could glimpse organs beneath. And yet, somehow, impossibly, it was still moving. Each step left a dark smear in the snow. Each breath came as a wet, gurgling wheeze. Its eyes, normally fierce and wild in creatures like this, were pleading. It stumbled closer until it was inches from the window, towering above us, the porch light casting grotesque shadows over its wounds. For a moment, God help me, I thought it was begging. Rachel gasped, covering her mouth, tears welling instantly in her eyes. Oh my God! I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare as this apex predator, a beast that should have inspired terror, looked at me like a drowning man begging for rescue. It swayed once, twice, then collapsed onto its side with a sickening thud that rattled the glass. A pool of blood spread rapidly, steaming in the snow. We stood frozen, watching as the bear's chest rose and fell in jagged shudders, each breath shallower than the last, until finally it stopped, dead. The silence afterward was crushing. Even the storm seemed muted. I turned slowly to Rachel. Her face was ashen, streaked with tears she hadn't even realized she'd shed. If a predator that size couldn't survive out there, my voice cracked. I swallowed hard and tried again. What chance do we have? She shook her head violently, backing away from the window, from the corpse sprawled outside. No, this isn't real. But it was. And the bear's wounds made no sense. I'd grown up here. I'd seen what hunters could do, what car collisions could do, even what other bears could do to each other. But this? The gashes were too wide, too clean. Some cuts looked like they'd been made with something sharper than claws, stronger than teeth, almost surgical, and yet jagged in a way that spoke of violence beyond comprehension. The thought hit me like a hammer. Something did this. Something bigger. Something worse. I forced myself to step back from the glass, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My skin crawled with the knowledge that whatever had mauled that bear might still be out there, moving through the storm toward us. Behind me, the animals whimpered again, as if sensing the shift. The collie buried its face into the wall. The mice pressed tighter together. Even the bird shook, feathers puffed out in terror. Rachel grabbed my arm. We need to get away from the windows. Now. I nodded, too rattled to argue. We stumbled back into the dining room, our flashlights cutting wild beams across the ceiling. My heart hadn't slowed. It thundered so hard I half expected it to burst. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered. Once, twice, Rachel's grip on me tightened. No, please not now. And then, with a harsh pop, the power died. The house plunged into darkness. When the lights died, the house didn't just go dark. It felt like the world itself exhaled and never drew breath again. The storm outside had been a living thing for hours, a relentless roar against the siding, a shrieking wind through the chimney. But in the instant the power snapped off, everything stilled. The howling vanished. The rattling window panes hushed. Even the rattling branches outside went slack. And that absence of sound, it wasn't relief. It was suffocation. I stood there in the pitch black, holding Rachel's trembling hand, every muscle in my body taut as a bowstring. My ears strained for anything, to prove the world hadn't ended in that second. But the silence was total, not just quiet, erased. The animals knew it too. The collie froze mid-breath, ears flattened. The cats were statues, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Even the little cardinal had gone still, its heartbeat no longer fluttering like a trapped motor. Felt like we'd been dropped into some vast, empty vacuum. I whispered before I could stop myself, voice barely audible. "Where's the wind?" Rachel shushed me violently, her nails biting into my arm. She was right. My words felt too loud, invasive, like they could break something fragile and bring it crashing down on us. And then, a sound. So soft at first I thought my mind had invented it to fill the void. A low scrape like fabric brushing wood. Then, clearer, closer, footsteps. They circled the house with an awful slowness. Heel, toe. Crunch of snow compacted under something heavier than a man. Rachel's breath hitched beside me. Then it spoke. "Hello." The word was so casual, so human, it made my stomach twist. A voice that should have been a comfort but instead sliced through the dark like a blade. It wasn't desperate like before. It wasn't pleading. It was conversational. Friendly even. A beat of silence. Then, louder, directly against the wall by the kitchen. "Can I come in now?" My knees nearly buckled. The voice was wrong. Too smooth. Too steady. Like someone reading lines they didn't understand but knew they had to repeat. There was no shiver from the cold, no break from exhaustion. Just flat, patient persistence. Every creature in the house seemed to press itself deeper into hiding. The dogs whimpered low, muffled, as if trying not to be heard. Rachel shook her head in frantic denial, mouthing the words "don't answer." I didn't plan to. My throat had locked up anyway. The footsteps circled again, unhurried, dragging across the porch, crunching into the drifts along the siding, passing beneath the windows one by one. Then came the scratching, violent now, shredding at the wood around the back door. Not frantic like before, testing, like fingernails dragging slowly across skin. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood, fighting back the urge to scream. Then the voice again, closer this time, directly beneath the living room window. "You shouldn't be alone in here. There's more than one of us, you know?" A chuckle followed. Soft, playful. It was the single most chilling sound I've ever heard. Rachel buried her face against my shoulder, trembling so violently I thought she might shake apart. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Just listened as the footsteps drew away again, crunching slow, deliberate circles around our fragile sanctuary. And then silence returned. Not the storm, not the world, just absence. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering, praying the retreat meant it was leaving. But even as the stillness deepened, I knew better. It hadn't gone far. It was waiting. Whatever Luke saw, it broke him. It happened at dawn, just as the first thin light began bleeding through the frostbitten curtains. The night had stretched on in endless terror, footsteps and whispers outside, silence pressing in, the animals holding their breath right alongside us. But when the storm finally gave way to gray morning, I realized Luke wasn't beside me anymore. I found him at the front window, one hand still clutching the frost-glazed sill. His eyes were wide, glassy, fixed on something far beyond the trees. His lips moved without sound, and his skin was so pale it looked almost blue. I shook him, called his name, even slapped his face. Nothing. He just stood there, frozen, staring at something I couldn't see. By the time I got him to the hospital in town, the doctors had their explanation ready. A minor stroke, they told me. Uncommon for his age, but not impossible. Stress, blood pressure, he's lucky to be alive. They showed me charts, scans, medical words that blurred together. They tried to reassure me, but I know what I saw. This wasn't a stroke. This wasn't a blood vessel bursting in his brain. This was something else. Something that reached through the glass and took hold of him, hollowed him out from the inside. Because Luke didn't collapse. He didn't seize. He didn't show pain. He just stopped, like someone had pulled the plug on the part of him that was human. And he's never come back. The man I loved sits in a chair now, eyes drifting to whatever horizon only he can see. Sometimes he mutters words that don't fit together. Sometimes he laughs softly, as though sharing a joke with someone who isn't there. I try to reach him, to call him back, but it's like shouting into a canyon that never echoes. The doctors tell me recovery is possible. They point to case studies, rehabilitation plans. But at night, when the house goes quiet, I can still hear his voice repeating one phrase over and over in his sleep. They're still out there. I never asked him what he saw at that window. Couldn't, because here's the truth, I never looked. When the scratching and the voice pressed close, when the footsteps circled and circled, I kept my eyes shut. I thought it was cowardice then. Maybe it still is. But part of me wonders if that choice saved me. Because Luke looked. He saw. And it unmade him. I've turned that thought over 1,000 times since that night. What would have happened if I dared to lift the curtain? If I'd met whatever was waiting beyond the glass? Would I be the one sitting empty in a chair, my mind shattered and lost? Or would I have seen something so terrible that death would have been kinder? The storm passed, but the house never felt the same again. The animals that had crammed inside for shelter scattered almost as soon as the winds died. The collie clawed at the back door until I let him out, then bolted into the trees without a backward glance. The cats slunk into the crawlspace and vanished. Even the little cardinal, the one I thought I'd saved, launched itself into the freezing dawn as if chased by unseen hands. None of them ever returned. For weeks afterward, I swore I caught glimpses of shadows moving at the treeline. Once, while shoveling snow, I found prints circling the porch. Too deep, too far apart to belong to any animal I knew. The sheriff told me it was black bear tracks. Common enough around here, he said, but I'd seen a bear die on that very porch, torn apart by something bigger than itself. And whenever I walk past that window, I feel Luke's eyes on me. His hollow stare seems to follow, warning me without words. Don't look outside. The doctors still say stroke. Neighbors shake their heads, offer casseroles, and mutter about stress. Everyone wants a tidy explanation, but explanations are for the living. I know better. That night in the blizzard, something knocked at our door. Something spoke in a voice that wasn't human. And when Luke dared to look, it saw him back. And if I'd looked too, well, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It's been 5 years since that blizzard. 5 winters of shoveling the same driveway, stacking the same firewood, pretending life ever went back to normal. 5 years of spoon-feeding Luke and bathing him, of listening to the television drone while his vacant eyes drift to the window as though waiting for something I can't see. People have stopped asking about him now. At first, neighbors came by with casseroles, offers to help. Then excuses. Then silence. I don't blame them. Who wants to sit in a house where every shadow feels too heavy, where every draft in the hall sounds like something breathing just beyond the door? The doctors still call it a stroke. They've long since stopped humoring me when I tell them the truth. But I know. Luke didn't break from blood pressure or chance. He broke because he looked when he shouldn't have. Because something outside wanted to be seen, and when he gave it that gift, it claimed him. And me? I've done everything I can to forget, to live in routine, in silence. But forgetting is impossible when the nights won't let you rest. Because sometimes, when the wind rises just right, when the snow comes down hard against the glass, I hear it again. That faint, deliberate scratching at the door. Not frantic, not animal, just steady, patient, like something reminding me it's still there, waiting. I never open, I never look, but every time, I wonder if this is the night they stop pretending to ask. I wonder if this is the night they come in whether I want them to or not. Luke stares at the window more often now, lips twitching as though holding back words. Once, in the middle of the night, I swear I heard him whisper, "They're closer." Sometimes I think about that bear on the porch, about the animals hiding in silence. Their instincts were sharper than mine. They knew to fear what I kept trying to explain away. And if it comes again, if it presses its voice against the door, calm and steady, asking to be let inside, I don't think I'll be able to pretend anymore. Next time, I know they won't leave. So if you've heard them too, if you've felt the scratching in the middle of a storm, tell me I'm not alone. Because the silence between knocks is the worst part. And one day soon, I think that silence will break.